Hey, this is Monsteropolis, show about anomalies, legends, and monsters. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Seth Breedlove. I'm joined, as always, by my pal, Mark Matsky.
Hello there.
And our pal, Heather Mosier.
Hello.
This episode is about the mysterious, abominable snow monster of the Himalayas. So I wrote down an outline, but real quickly, could the three of us talk about like how we were introduced to the Yeti, or like what the Yeti meant to us?
What the Yeti means to me.
Yeah.
Two paragraphs.
I have a feeling that Mark and I are both going to have very specific views on this, and I'd be interested to hear if you do.
Yeah, so my first introduction to the Yeti was Unsolved Mysteries, which I was just watching the clip shortly before we started here to refresh my memory of all the parts that they talk about.
Is it as creepy as every other Unsolved Mystery?
It is, and what I was telling Andy is that in that they talk about the hand, the Yeti hand, and I remember
I remember you telling me about this.
Yeah, very clearly being terrified of that hand because it looked so scary. And when that came out, I don't know if it was a rerun when we watched it or if it was like in real time when we watched it, because we would watch Unsolved Mysteries every Sunday or whenever it came out. Anyway, that hand stuck with me. And that night, I was in kindergarten. And I always had a nightlight because I thought as a kid that made more sense. Really, it doesn't, because it creates shadows and stuff to scare you. But I remember with the nightlight on, staring at my bedroom door, waiting to see that hand grab my bedroom door and shut it. And I stayed up all night.
No.
So the Yeti, the hand anyway, was terrifying for me. But other than that, my introduction to anything that was like the Yeti was Bumble from Rudolph.
Yep.
So, which much different. He just had a bad tooth.
Equally terrifying.
Yeah, but that was my introduction to the Yetis. He kept me up all night
as a symbol of terror.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, it is Bumble. That's my first memory of Yeti as like a character or a being, because I think looking back, I'm pretty sure. I sort of found out about Bigfoot first and then reverse engineered back to Yeti as you start to get into those books, like all the Reader's Digest and compilations of unexplained phenomena. Then it starts with Yeti, then goes to Bigfoot, but I sort of went backwards. So, I remember seeing, like, probably my first real exposure to the phenomena is that Shipton cast print, the photo of that with the big toe and next to the pickaxe, and then there's the movie, the Hammer movie with Peter Cushing. Yeah. I saw that, I'm sure, on independent television growing up somewhere along the line, Saturday afternoon.
Which that's not the Toho. Isn't there a Toho Yeti movie?
Yeah, the Toho Yeti movie is called Half Human.
Okay, that's right.
And the problem with that is that it's a banned film in Japan because of how it depicts some of the people who live in the northern portion of Japan. So it was hard to see. It's one of those films you hear about long before you actually see it, except there is a Americanized version of it that cuts and pastes the monster scenes with John Carradine sitting in an office talking about all of his great discoveries in Nepal. And it's still good. The sections where it's the monster and his child are still good to see, but the original version is really, really good. But I had to wait a long time to see it.
I've talked about the guy I went to church with who gave me the DVD with he had recorded all these movies on TV or something and gave them to me on a DVD that he had burned for me. And he thought I was already into Bigfoot for some reason. And one of the documentaries, there was a Yeti documentary, there was a lake monster documentary, and there was something about Bigfoot, and then there was something about UFOs. So it was all the stuff that I'm now into.
Yeah.
But the Yeti one I just found on Sasquatch Archives, Todd Prescott's YouTube channel, which is a really great resource if like you're just getting into Bigfoot and you want to watch, like, he's got interviews with the Paul Freeman interview from Good Morning America is on there. Like, he's got all sorts of like really cool pieces of Bigfoot history documented on there. But he had the documentary. Apparently, it came out in 1989. Naturally, Peter Byrne is featured heavily in it. And it's got some of that real creepy synth music from the 80s. It's got the vibe that I love. And so I actually was watching it right before you got here. But that was like, that's what I remember my introduction to the Yeti being. And then reading Coleman's Tom Slick book. Which, is that what you have?
This one?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Because there's a section in there that goes into the Jimmy Stewart. The Jimmy Stewart episode, which I'm sure we'll talk about in this episode. But I was so fascinated by all that stuff and the fact that in this time period that I love anyway, which is like the 50s and 60s, there was all this stuff going on and like these vast expeditions, these big expeditions like that were going out looking for the Yeti. So, that was my introduction, and probably like even more so than Bigfoot. I was really into that stuff when I first started getting into all this. So Yeti has been a big part of my life since I was a child, or since I was like 25.
Yeah. So you're just like Lauren Coleman in that respect, because that was his entry point into cryptozoology, was seeing the John Carradine Half Human movie on TV and going to his teacher and asking like the next day or whenever school was next and asking, what is this about the Yeti? And the teacher said, it's nothing, ignore it, go back to your real studies.
Go back to reality.
Yeah. And that sent him on his track to find out for himself what was behind the Yeti.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you describe the most basic version of the Yeti? Either of you jump in. Like, what is the Yeti?
Yeah.
So,
Heather, go.
Yeah. So the image that pops in my head is Bumble. Yeah. So you get the white fur, bluish skin.
Naturally, yeah.
Herky jerky movement.
Yeah, right.
Odd.
A little bit angry. But yeah, I guess if somebody says Yeti, the first image that comes to my head, aside from a cartoon version, is just a white Bigfoot, essentially, but smaller.
Accurate?
Well,
No.
yeah, no, not really. I mean, of the sightings that are reported, it is smaller typically, but is generally like a dark brown or a black color. If they sometimes have a white stripe on them, that is reported. But the thing that like Tom Slick that you referenced before, and one of his main contributions to the whole field was to suggest that there's at least 3 creatures that all get called Yeti in that region of the world, and that one of them is sort of the Bigfoot Sasquatch cousin. One is a very small creature, almost like a monkey-sized 3-footer, and then the other is almost certainly a bear of some type, a rather large bear. And there's interesting stuff that Brian Sykes brings out in some of his DNA studies about the nature of what that bear might be.
The brown bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had forgot we've talked about this at some point, and like how the different, because there's obviously it's a large area that we're talking about, and there's multiple types of terrain and environments, and that kind of plays into the different types, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I got to say, I found all my information in my hours of research off a website called grahamhoyland.com. I have to confess, I've never heard of this man. But in looking him up, I now want to read his book because he sounds pretty legit. He's done a lot of like documentary work for like Travel Channel and Discovery and all that kind of stuff. But he wrote a book called Yeti, An Abominable History. Real quick, just reading about it. It says tales of the Himalayan Yeti have been recorded for centuries. This huge ape-like hairy creature has tantalized explorers, mountaineers, and locals with curious footprints and elusive appearances, but until recently, no one has been able to identify what this mythical creature might be or even determine if it is real. On an expedition to the remote Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan, Graham Hoyland found and filmed footprints of the mythical Yeti in a part of the country that has never before been visited by Western explorers, in a lost valley near the unclimbed mountain Gangkar Punsum. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hoyland believes he was stalked by the mysterious Yeti, a beast so unspeakably powerful that locals say it can kill a yak with one savage blow of its fist. As he delves into the fascinating history of this ancient legend, Hoyland hears tales of the Yeti from Sherpas who have tried and failed to track it. He explores the literary hinterland behind the legend and searches for the Yeti's American cousin Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, and their African relative, Mokele Mbembe. Anyway, it sounds super cool, this book does, so I'm going to have to check it out. What's up? Is Mokele Mbembe the dinosaur? Yeah. I'm not sure how all this. It all
Loch Ness too, so that was confusing as well.
They're all related. They're all cousins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you didn't know all cryptids are all one big family.
But this guy's climbed the mountains and done his due diligence. So all those people watching on YouTube who say, get out in the woods, they can't say that to this guy. That's been in the woods and in the mountains. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you talked about these. He actually lists the types here. So the first and largest is the terrifying Dzuteh, D-Z-U-T-E-H. Dzuteh.
We'll go with that.
All right. Dzuteh, who stands 8 feet tall when he is on his back legs. However, he prefers to walk on all fours. He can kill a yak with one swipe of his claws. And this would be your brown bear guy, the brown bear man. Which, yeah, we should talk about maybe that with the evidence stuff. But Sykes did a documentary or a series. It was like a 3-episode series, I believe.
Yep. And books to match.
Well, books.
Uh-huh.
But so that's number one. Number two is the smaller Chuthe or Thelma.
What?
Thelma. It says
the other one's Louise.
Chuthe or Thelma, a little reddish colored child-sized creature who walks on 2 legs and has long arms. He is seen in the forests of Sikkim and Nepal, which I believe is kind of not arid, very much like a rainforest.
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah. And so I think that's the thing too that I wanted to mention here is the first and the largest, the big like bear-like dude. That's the one that's seen kind of up in the mountains,
the high range,
up in the high range,
up in the snow fields.
Mm-hmm. And then Chuthe is down in the rainforest, and then there is the Mete, who is most like a man and has orangey red fur on his body. He attacks humans and is the one most often depicted on monastery wall paintings. Yeti or Yeti is a mutation of his name. He looks most like the Tintin in Tibet Yeti.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. We now know all we need to know about Yetis.
And that would be the one that has the creepy hands.
Yeah. I don't like that one.
And in that description, that thing that draws to mind comparisons is an orangutan with the hair color and the approximate size. The only thing is that they're not native to mainland Asia. Mm-hmm. So that's the hidden animal part of that.
Well, and the fact that it's hanging out in cold. I mean, are there any primates that spend large amounts of their time in cold environments? They're typically
no. I mean, they need to be
tropical.
Yeah, kept warm to a certain degree.
A type of primate that's like
there's snow monkeys.
That's
Snow
like
monkeys?
fuzzy, really fuzzy, and they show them hanging out in the hot springs on these videos. They're just chilling in the hot springs, but they're like really fluffy and snowy.
Yeah, they're in Japan. snow
That's it.
snow monkeys.
Yeah.
In temperate areas like Japanese macaque.
Oh, macaque.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
some. But
That's so
Yeah. Those are cute.
Pliny.
I love those guys.
Pliny.
Pliny.
It's Pliny?
It's Pliny.
Is that true?
Yes.
Wait, what?
Pliny the
Pliny
Elder.
the Elder, not Pliny? Why did I always Pliny?
Boy, I don't know, but it's
And-
Pliny.
Okay, circa 300 BC, India. Tom Swift. Famed Bigfoot and Yeti investigator Tom Swift. Pliny the Elder. I don't like that at all. There's one in.
Oh,
There's one
okay.
in. Pliny doesn't. Am I wrong? Doesn't it seem like it should be Pliny?
My preference would be,
Pliny.
even though it is Pliny,
Yeah.
it deserves a long I based on
Thank
old
you.
school
Thank you,
grammar.
Mark.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
See, sometimes Mark agrees with me, not often. but Alexander the Great set out to conquer Persia and India in 326 BC.
Alexander.
I was glad that you caught that.
Alexander
Yep.
Petakov the Great set out to conquer Persia and India in 326 BC, penetrating nearly as far as Kashmir. He heard about strange. Anyone want to correct my pronunciation? Kashmir. He heard about strange wild
If we
men.
do the riff, will we get in trouble?
Oh no,
Yeah.
I'm going to mispronounce
Copyright
something
strike.
else in this because I don't know how to do this. He heard about strange wild men in the snows who were described as something like the satyrs, satyrs, the lustful Greek gods with the body of a man but the horns, legs, and feet of an animal. Alexander demanded to have one of them brought to him, but the local villagers said the creature could not survive at low altitude. Later, Pliny the Elder wrote in his Naturalis Historia, "In the land of the satyrs, in the mountains that lie to the east of India, live creatures that are extremely swift, as they can run on both 4 feet and on 2. They have bodies like men, and because of their speed, can only be caught when they are ill or old." That's 300 BC. They're talking about Yeti. Am I hearing music?
Yes,
I
you
can't. I have my headphones on. What the heck is going on out there? Anyway, that seems to be the earliest sort of. So loud. The earliest mention of the Yeti. Am I correct or wrong? Do you have anything?
I don't have anything earlier than that. No, no. I have the first English reference in 1832, the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal, that describes in northern Nepal an orangutan-like creature. And just a real quick reference to that. It's not like a whole article about it, but it just mentions there's weird sort of ape-like creatures being seen in on the India side of Everest.
I have something from 1832, or not 1832, but 1830. Earliest Western account of a wild man in the Himalayas dates from, never mind, 1832. It's given by Brian Houghton Hodgson, the court of Nepal's first British resident and the first Englishman permitted to visit this forbidden land. Hodgson had to contend with a hotbed that was and still is Nepalese politics. He was particularly interested in the natural history and ethnography of the region, and so his report carries some weight. He recorded that his native hunters had been frightened by a wild man. Religion had introduced the Bandar, rhesus macaque, monkey into the central region, where it seems to flourish half domesticated in the neighborhood of temples in the populous valley of Nepal proper. My shooters were once alarmed in the Kachar by the apparition of a wild man, possibly an orang, but I doubt their accuracy. They mistook the creature for a, oh, golly, a kakademon, rakshas demon, and fled from it instead of shooting it. It moved, they said, erectly, was covered with long dark hair, and had no tail. That might be the same. I think it's just like a more detailed version of the same thing. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I got one from 1889. You got anything between there? Do you got anything from there?
Heck no.
How much research did you do?
Unsolved mystery.
Yeah. I like that Heather has moved into my role in this episode. 1889? You got anything?
No.
Okay. Well, Graham Hoyland did. Major Lawrence Waddell Northern India, circa 1889. The first sighting of Yeti footprints by a Westerner was made by the English soldier and explorer Major Lawrence Waddell. He was a professor of Tibetan culture and a professor of chemistry, a surgeon and an archaeologist, and he had roamed Tibet in disguise. Doesn't say if he was disguised as the Yeti, but that would have been crazy if he was like roaming around in a gorilla suit and found Yeti footprints. He is thought by some.
Look at me. I'm the Yeti.
They later based the movie Half Human on him.
Yeah, right.
He's thought
There's
by
a documentary. That's the secret of that film.
Oh, he's actually okay. So he's like the basis for Indiana Jones. One of his theories included a belief that the beginning of all civilization dated from the Aryan Sumerians, who were blonde Nordics with blue eyes. All right, let's move on. Apparently, he had some Nazi ties.
Yeah.
Apparently, the belief in these creatures is universal among Tibetans. None, however, of the many Tibetans who I have interrogated on this subject could ever give me an authentic case. On the most superficial investigation, it always resolved into something heard tell of. These so-called hairy wild men are evidently the great yellow snow bear, Ursus isabelinus, which is highly carnivorous and often kills yaks. All right, that's just more of the same. More stuff. I got 1920s too. Can we get into some of the characters of?
Oh, of course.
Of Yeti, which we probably need to talk about that handcast at some point too, because it plays in so heavily with like Peter Byrne and Tom Swift / Slick.
So this is CIA alias.
Yeah.
Tom Swift.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we can talk certainly about Tom Slick, who's, his whole influence is really huge because in the 50s he started sponsoring actual expeditions into areas that had really never had a Western expedition before, looking for specifically the Yeti creature, looking for evidence. What's really interesting, you get this in the 50s, is the sense that they're right on the cusp of a find. Mm-hmm. Like all they have to do is show up, and it's just a matter of time, maybe days, maybe weeks, they're going to get something. Mm-hmm. And that hope was really prevalent in Tom Slick, in who he recruited and how he brought people in. He was an oil and a beef businessman, had millions of dollars, inherited a lot of money as well. He wasn't always able to access that money easily because it being tied up in his investments, and is still making money for him. So to pull out a huge bunch of money was not always possible for him. So he gets another guy involved named Johnson. So when you look into the history of this, you're going to have Slick Expedition and Slick Johnson. And Johnson is just the guy who's helping him fund, have the liquid assets to be able to pay these guys. What's really cool is that, like on this very first expedition that Slick sets up, the first guy that he gets on board is Peter Byrne. Mm-hmm. And, Peter Byrne, of course, is at this point already has a reputation for being an adventurer and a guide, but he was really sort of waiting around for somebody who would be able to sponsor him on these really big game hunts, such as for Yeti, unexplained stuff. So all that is to say, it's Peter Byrne is the through line on all of the Slick expeditions. No matter who else is going on these, it's he and sometimes his brother, actually, Brian Byrne, who doesn't get the same level of attention, but
it's not as cool.
It's not as cool. So just real quickly, Tom Slick, his father died when he was 14. By 1960, he had inherited $15 million, the way his will was set up for him to receive his father's money. He went to Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire for his prep school work, ended up at Yale. While he was at Yale, he took a summer and went around and just did whatever he wanted to, including going to Loch Ness with some of his friends. Yeah.
Slick was in Exeter?
Yeah. Slick was in Exeter.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was definitely worth a mention.
Yeah.
That he spent time there.
You know, that's where Joe Hill lives, not to get off track here. That's where Joe Hill lives.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Andy's making a mental note of the timestamp so you can cut that out.
So, I mean, what that Loch Ness trip proves is that he was interested in cryptozoology and unknown topics. And it's pretty much proven at this point, based on timing of things, that it was Bernard Heuvelmann's book On the Track of Unknown Animals that inspired Slick to actually do something about discovering something and putting his money behind an event. His dad had been a successful businessman, obviously, with all that money to inherit, and he had spent significant time in India. And some of Tom Slick's greatest memories were of his father telling him tales of India, you know, all of the cultural stuff and legends and things that he had learned, and he looked forward to his dad bringing him back stuff from India. So that, I think, also helps explain why Slick was so eager to get back to that general area. There's some personal reasons as well. So in spring of 1956, Slick just undertakes his own travel to go to the Indian side of Everest and start asking around. I mean, he was in one way a original just story collector. That's how he got his first ideas about Yeti, and his ideas about Yeti being separate creatures or distinct species instead of just one Bigfoot-like monster. And to give sort of like cultural context to this and biological context, by 1956, only 9 Westerners had seen the giant panda in the wild.
Wow.
I mean, it was in the 30s that one was brought back. And the interesting crossover is that one of the men responsible for bringing a giant panda back to a Western zoo would end up on a Slick expedition. So that's kind of a
Cool.
super tie-in.
Am I wrong, or isn't the 30s also around the same time that the mountain gorilla was established?
Slightly earlier.
Was it?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So you've got...
I tried.
Yeah. So this was the situation is that Peter Byrne is... So Slick does his recon, goes back home. Peter Byrne's just over there, like
hanging out,
doing Peter Byrne things. And he ends up talking to Tenzing Norgay, who was Sherpa for Sir Edmund Hillary, who's an important part of this story, actually. And it's Tenzing who tells Peter Byrne, have you heard about this Tom Slick guy? Because I think you should probably cross paths. It might lead to something. And so Peter Byrne contacts Slick. Slick writes back almost immediately, and that's how the first expedition gets rolling, is based off of their correspondence. At the time, in order to get in to Nepal, you had to have some institution. The government of Nepal made this rule: you have to have an institution sponsor you. You can't just come in here looking for monsters, looking for creatures. So he actually, with ties to Texas, where he was living at the time, San Antonio Zoo sponsored their expedition. So they were good. They could come in and look for whatever they wanted to look for. And that leads to the Slick Yeti Reconnaissance of March 1957. It was only about 3 to 5 weeks long, and the only people from a Western perspective who were on it were Tom Slick himself, Peter Byrne, and then an Indian guide named Andy Bacchetti. And along with those 3 guys, there were 7 Sherpas, 40 porters. So 40 guys just to carry their stuff. That was considered a small expedition. And that's going to be in contrast to some of these other expeditions, like National Geographic would sponsor one, where they had like upwards of 400 people.
Oh my.
It's like an army.
Yeah, it is, looking for Yeti, you know. And so Slick took that into account, and he said, you're not going to sneak up on anything with 400 people walking around. So he was really interested in like keeping it small. Their goal was to collect a specimen. And this was, even back in 1957, very controversial. Because Slick was like, I want a specimen one way or the other. Dead, live, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And
Ditto.
so, they made their way to the Arun Valley, Arun, in northeast Nepal. It was chosen because there are a lot of stories of a 7-foot, very Bigfoot-like Yeti being seen in the forested areas. So they really weren't going on this expedition to the snowfields. They were looking in the forests. And long story short, they ended up finding tracks. Both Peter Byrne and Tom Slick each independently found track lines, which they photographed and casted. And that kind of set the tone for the expeditions that followed. The only thing with Tom Slick's involvement is early on in that trip, they were in, like, imagine, you talked about Indiana Jones, you imagine some old Nepalese rickety bus. Mm-hmm. That's what all their gear was on, and Slick and Byrne were on this bus, and it was parked on a decline facing up. And Byrne and Slick were in the bus, and the brakes malfunction, and it starts to roll backwards down a hill. Mm-hmm. So there was no way to stop it. And they both have to jump off the bus, and Slick jumps off, lands on both knees, and sustains some significant injury. It didn't keep him from going on the rest of the trip. But by that time, Slick was, I don't know if he was married and divorced by this point, but his mother had a lot of say in his life. And she said, I do not want you to go on anything that dangerous ever again. And he didn't. Mm-hmm. He listened to his mom, never went back to that area of the world. But there's pictures of him, and there's pictures of him in the book from that trip towards the end of it, and his knees are all bandaged up. You can see where he jumped out of the bus.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
When did they find the hand?
The hand is on, I believe it's the 1958 Slick Johnson expedition, where they go specifically to the monasteries and start finding relics and stuff like that.
Interesting too is I believe prior to this, prior to Byrne even being involved in Yeti expeditions, he claims to have found or seen tracks, right?
Oh yeah,
like 1940 something. Mm-hmm. He claimed he saw tracks before he was even really aware of what they were or what that was.
Yeah, that's true. And speaking of that, on the 57 expedition, Byrne finds a track line he spends 3 hours following. I mean, that's just, I don't know how many number of tracks that translates into, but that's a lot of Yeti footprints to follow around.
Are those tracks, the other tracks that they talk about finding, are they comparable to the Shipton stuff?
Yeah, they're very much like that.
With that
the big toe
digit sticking off the side. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
About the question with the Shipton tracks always is, did because some of them were in snow, did they melt and refreeze and change shape? But a lot, like in the example of Tom Slick, the tracks that he found were not in snow. They were in mud. So they were more of a reliable sort of print.
Isn't the theory on what causes the Shipton tracks that it's basically like a bear double step and then like a squirrel or something? Is it just a bear double step? I thought there was like a third angle to that made it seem more outlandish, where like like a squirrel or something had to jump into.
Oh really? See, I haven't that I'm not aware of.
Okay,
I know
it's just, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, but it's that double step that almost makes it look like it's going forward and backward at the same time. Mm-hmm. And you sometimes hear the weird detail to Yeti that their feet are on backwards. Mm. That's in a lot of the folklore type tales surrounding that. Mm. And some have suggested maybe seeing that kind of track is what led them to that conclusion.
So now that I'm thinking, okay, so the hand is found. When is is it the skull that?
It's like a scalp, isn't it?
Is it the scalp that Jimmy Stewart is involved in, or is it the hand?
It's the hand.
It's the hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
this is my favorite bit.
The scalp.
Story.
The scalp is something that really Sir Edmund Hillary made a big deal out of the scalp, mostly to poke fun at it.
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I can't help it.
And to use it as like, what happened, it was like in 1960. That was the World Book Scientific Expedition. That was Sir Edmund Hillary and Marlin Perkins of Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom. They were both involved in this. And they went into it essentially to debunk abominable snowman. Like there's nothing to this. And they did a good job because they got the most attention. Obviously, they were going there to make a film and to do a publication based on what. And that's like in the later part of Lauren Coleman's book, Tom Slick, True Life Encounters. He says that Hillary expedition and what they did and what they brought back pretty much set Yeti exploration back decades. Because Tom Slick wasn't there to make, like to trumpet his finds. He just wanted to find one, bring it back. But the Hillary thing was much more of a publicity-related event, and their bias was totally, this is all false.
Right.
And so people hearing those names attached with that opinion, people sort of just gave up on that and started concentrating on Bigfoot, United States. It's a lot easier. I mean, if you're from North America, it's easier to go to the Northwest than all the way over there. So, yeah, let's talk about the hand, because there's, even with like Brian Sykes, there's interesting stuff about the DNA testing of the Pangboche, I don't know how to say it exactly, but the hand factors into it and was tested. So that was, what were we on, 57. The 58 Slick Johnson expedition, the number of searchers grows. And that's where you get Peter Burns' brother Brian and Gerald Russell. Gerald Russell is the guy who is involved in the recovery of the giant panda that I mentioned before. This is one of those classic, seemed like a good idea at the time expeditions, but those people involved could not get along. They each had their own idea about how this was going to work and where the best place to go and the best method of securing a creature would be. And poor Tom Slick, obeying his mom, staying at home.
That's what you got to do.
Is trying to manage them by sending these letters that somehow get to these guys up in the mountains. I'm still trying to figure out how that works. But he's like, no, try to...
Carrier pigeon.
Yeah, right. Try to work with each other here. The main thing is getting the creature, and some of those letters are reproduced in the book. They're kind of sad but funny because you can imagine the strength of personality involved with these guys. And if you've ever heard Peter Byrne, for example, I mean, he's a good guy, but he's going to do things his way. And that's how all these guys are.
The book itself, too, is probably my favorite Coleman book. And the story, Slick's story in itself would make an amazing movie, which is apparently that was a thing at one time that was going to happen. But yeah, just wanted to mention that that book is definitely worth checking out. Yeah,
it's great. It is really good. This one ended up, and to give you an idea, like culturally back home, Newsweek actually reported on this expedition in February of 58. They spent 113 days approximately in the field, and it was quite it was basically split into 3 teams, each guy sort of doing their own thing and wanting to be the first to get the little creature, because they were after the 3-footer.
Yeah,
that's important to say too. They had decided at least we're not going to get the 8-foot. Oh, sorry, I thought you were making a motion there. So the thing that they found on the expedition included lots of tracks. Somebody like a porter or a Sherpa had a sighting of a 3-foot Yeti in a creek bed that he thought was hunting frogs, because the frogs would come out at a certain time of night. And he saw one in that situation. This really grabbed my attention for obvious reasons. There was an alleged Yeti Cave that was discovered. Inside, it was lined with juniper nests. So in the description that's given in the book, it sounded all very familiar like in construction. Yeah.
Olympic project.
Yeah.
Really?
Just juniper instead of huckleberry.
Huh.
And then, of course, photographs of the scalps and the hands that they were given access to That was part of that 1958 expedition. And then it's the whole intrigue of getting pieces of the hand out of the country. That's where, Jimmy Stewart and his wife Gloria get involved with what amounts to smuggling the hand out of the United States and
Jimmy
back
was
here.
like friends with Slick, right? Or
he was friends with Slick, and he was friends with another, I believe Johnson was the last name. They were big game hunters.
okay.
He was really acquainted with them and knew them well, and evidently had vacation / adventured with them before. So they all worked together to get it out. And various people involved in the search ended up with bits and pieces of the hand, which is how it was able to be tested by Sykes much, much later on.
Right. But there was also some mystery about the hand, because once it left Nepal, there's this brief period of time where it like disappears or something, correct?
Yeah, I didn't get really far into that, but one of those questions involved with that is how, was there damage done to the specimen? Mm-hmm. Because in original pictures of the hand, the thumb appears quite long. Mm-hmm. And then it shortens, when it's recovered, whenever that is. So the question is, was it the same hand? Or was it something different? Mm-hmm. If it was the same hand, was there damage done to it? And it seems likely that it was the same hand and that people just took parts because they wanted, for posterity's sake, have something to give. And that's, in a sense, that's how Loren Coleman ends up with samples to give to the Brian Sykes test, is that he had, I think, hair samples that were taken from one of the Slick expeditions labeled as Animal X, because that's what they referred to it as. Yeah. And they ran tests on it and found out, I'm not going to remember this, that the hairs belonged to a serow, S-E-R-O-W, which I had no idea what that was. I had to look it up. It's kind of a goat-like animal found in that part of the world. So, and the other thing, in the DNA test on the hand, in Sykes' estimation, it was contaminated. It had to have been. It had been handled by so many people, and that he was able to narrow it down based on the type of DNA sequence that what he tested was actually Peter Byrne DNA.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which opens the door, in Sykes' opinion, to the idea of retesting the hand, because it could still hold some sort of information that would be helpful.
I just remembered something too. That thing with his mom, that is one of the key reasons that the Bigfoot expeditions of the 50s and 60s that were funded by Slick. Because he couldn't go to Nepal anymore, but he could go to the Pacific Northwest and wander around the woods with his buddies there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's one of the reasons like the PNW, the early PNW expeditions even happened.
Correct.
Which I believe I know because of you. So, anyway, thanks, Mark. We did not touch on everything here, but we are out of time. So I guess we're going to be doing Yeti Part 2 very soon.
Watch for it.
Keep your eyes peeled.
Watch for all three of those Yeti creatures coming your way.
If you're a fan of the show, and we know you're out there, whoever you are, please go leave a rating and review on iTunes or Google Play or whatever. Maybe leave a nice comment on YouTube to offset some of the insanity. And you can also give a little hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you become a channel member to watch longer versions of the show as well. But thanks for listening to this week's Yeti Talk.